Welcome to City Inside Out. Believe it or not, next week the Monorail Board will vote on a preferred route, including specific station locations. Today we get a preview of that decision. Monorail Board Chair Tom Weeks joins us, and later concerns about just how the monorail will serve Seattle Center. Jane Zaletsky will be here. She is the head of the annual Bumbershoot Festival there. It's the monorail that gets our attention this hour, right after the news. First today, the cost of war, which has started to add up right here in Seattle. Mayor Nichols says that so far the city has spent north of $1 million on police and security just since the Iraq War began 10 days ago. Much of that has been officer overtime and dealing with protesters who have demonstrated and marched for several days in downtown. A number of the anti-war activists who were in the streets last week were in City Hall this week. They came to protest not the war, but the city's response to it. Harsh treatment by the police was their complaint.
I went back to join my husband at the front of 2nd Avenue where the protest was prior to the march. And when all the police had taken formation, there were 3 shotguns pointed at us. And I mean pointed. I don't mean just held. They were pointed into the crowd aggressively like you do before you take aim. And I just wonder what kind of city we live in when you point 3 shotguns at a group of very peaceful protesters expressing their First Amendment rights.
My name is Tim Young. I'm better known by this picture. You are here, I didn't seek publicity. I didn't want it. I didn't want to tangle with the police. They thrust it on me. And I think they treated me barbarously, barbarically, brutally, intentionally, hatefully.
On Saturday, it was like a cattle call. It was like they were herding animals instead of treating people with dignity. And at the end of the march, the people who were penned in, and they were literally penned in, were told that they could leave by Tuesdays if they promised they would go home and not go back to the federal building. And what was happening at the federal building was not over yet. Our permit was still in force.
Police Chief Gil Kurlikowski appeared before the council as well this week to answer these various charges. Part of the problem, he said, was that not all the marchers were necessarily peaceful.
I've been out every day amongst the groups down at Westlake or either at the federal building. I've also been in Spock. The mayor spent probably 6 hours in the police operations center on Saturday. And a lot of the speeches, a lot of the rhetoric really was trying to ask for more direct action. Statements such as, "We are truly at war," meaning an internal war. And if you look at a number of the quotes, the Nyon spokeswoman says, "We're pushing the envelope." Another individual then is quoted, "The idea is to shut down traffic in the downtown corridor." And she proceeded to provide instruction on how to sit down when police approach. Some of the protesters have complained to me that while they've been in attendance, that these individuals who are asking for, advocating more direct action are really taking away from the peaceful anti-war message that they're attempting to deliver. Unfortunately, our officers in our department, we do not have the ability to individualize a person's motives or to separate out everyone based upon those kinds of things.
Next up, cellular antennas. The mayor this week said the message from neighborhoods did not break up on its way to City Hall. Cell towers, he now agrees, are not appropriate in single-family zones. Too large and too tall, he says. This pleased many neighborhood leaders who had opposed cell towers. The mayor now says that sightings in single-family neighborhoods will be done only as a very last resort. Wireless phone companies countered the ban by warning no antennas, no service, but Nichols insists that cell access can be provided without locating towers in neighborhoods. County monorail, anyone? Soon you may just have that choice. This week, a new organization filed an initiative to create a county-wide monorail, talk about ambitious, which would connect the entire region, city and suburbs. The planners, separate from the Seattle group, hope to get enough signatures to qualify for the fall ballot. In the meantime, ponder this: how's your landlord? The Seattle Weekly recently stirred the civic pot with a cover story exposing a particularly egregious apartment owner. Almost everyone at City Hall took notice, for ultimately the government is responsible for enforcing standards in rental housing. The head of the city's Code Compliance Department responded to the newspaper article during a meeting with council members this week. Here's Diane Sigamura.
That was not a happy story on the cover of Seattle Weekly for the city or for the tenants. I think the good news to this story is we believe 80 to 85% of our landlords are basically good landlords. They either maintain their housing well, or when there is a violation, will work with us to come into compliance. We have difficulty with the 15 to 20%. That's just an estimate. They can be very time-consuming, very costly to the city as we try to work on enforcement strategies.
Partly to blame for the problem of bad landlords is that the city doesn't have mandatory inspections of rental units. It intervenes only when tenants complain, and sometimes those tenants are reluctant to do that for fear of landlord retaliation. There is also the perennial tension for the city of wanting, on the one hand, to combat substandard housing, but on the other, not wanting to push very low-rent tenants out on the streets in the process. Well, the new downtown library sure looks pretty good in pictures, and that may be about all we see of the completed structure for at least another year. This week, library officials said the downtown facility will not open until next March. This is the second delay for the project, which was originally supposed to be ready this fall. Various construction problems are to blame. Librarian Deborah Jacobs says that the city won't be charged for the delays or overruns. Luckily, the temporary downtown library and the convention center will be able to extend its lease to accommodate the delayed move-in. Well, how Seattle is this next story: collecting rain for watering your garden. The city is helping residents do just that by selling rain barrels. They capture falling precipitation, store it indefinitely, and dispense it when you are ready to water your grass, flowers, etc. Totally eco, eh? And just such a barrel can be yours for the very low price of $32, tax included. The city is sponsoring a one-day sale of the water collectors on April 12th. For more information about this offer, you can check our website at www.seattlechannel.org. And by the way, the city says that because of the recent rains, Seattle's water supply is officially good for the time being. And now some neighborhood items to pass along. Here's what we've rounded up from around town this week. Dateline University District, the city plans to install up to 5 giving meters along the Ave. The idea is for pedestrians to drop in their spare change. It will be used to hire homeless youth in projects to spruce up the area. However, many of the supposed beneficiaries, young homeless men and women, are skeptical of the giving meters plan. They worry that it will take money away from their panhandling, which incidentally is exactly what the mayor hopes will happen. Some youth have threatened to sabotage the meters if they are indeed installed. And now over to the Central District. The Douglas Truth Library became an official city landmark on Monday. It was built in 1914 and is scheduled for a $5 million expansion later this year. 8 other branch libraries in Seattle were also given historic status this week. They are Northeast, Magnolia, Queen Anne, West Seattle, Fremont, University, Lake City, and Green Lake. This news from Ballard: a new pea patch is set to open in that part of town called Time Patch. It is the first community garden ever to be located in a city park. All the rest are on separate properties. And finally, this: bowling is back on Broadway. After 30 years of no strikes, spares, or gutter balls, the Capitol Hill neighborhood is set to get 14 new lanes. It's the first business to apply for a bowling permit in Seattle in nearly 4 decades. A side note, did you know that a few years ago some local investors bought the Pro Bowlers Association? Its headquarters is now right here in Seattle. And next, our City Inside Out calendar for the upcoming weeks. History House will soon open an exhibition of Seattle's Central District, highlighting its past and present. It's part of an ongoing series spotlighting Seattle neighborhoods. History House is located in Fremont. The Central District display begins on April 5th and runs through the end of May. Next, Longfellow Creek Stewardship Meeting. Help learn about efforts to restore various sites along this West Seattle stream. That gathering takes place on Tuesday the 8th. Station planning is now happening for Sound Transit's Link Light Rail. A meeting on Tuesday, April 8th at the Rainier Community Center will discuss designs for the McClellan Street station. And finally, a forum about Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood and the arts will be on Thursday, April 10th. Guest speakers include Councilmember Nick Licata and Michael Kaloran, Director of the city's Office of Cultural Affairs. For more information about any of these events, you can check our website at www.seattlechannel.org. And finally today, the end of an era to announce no more mercury thermometers. Last week, King County officially banned the sale of such devices, citing mercury's toxic effects. Health officials say there are accurate and safe alternatives to traditional thermometers. Now they tell us. That's it for the news. Stay with us. When City Inside Out continues, we take a look at the monorail. Next week, they announce their preferred alternative. Does that mean things are set in stone? That and more with Tom Weeks, chair of the Monorail Board, who joins us, and later the head of Bumbershoot Visits with her worries about how the monorail may affect Seattle Center. All that when City Inside Out continues in a moment. We now welcome Tom Weeks. He is the chair of the Seattle Monorail Project. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
What does a preferred alternative mean?
What it means is we are entering into an environmental impact statement on the whole 14-mile route. And we want the public to have a good idea of what our best thinking at this moment is about where the monorail would go if we were to build it today. But it's not a final decision. We need to study all the environmental impacts, and we need to engage in a community discussion over the next 8 months. So we're not making any decisions until December.
And the route, which the voters pretty much mandated, doesn't, however, say necessarily which side of the street it'll be and where stations necessarily ought to be located. The preferred alternative is an attempt to make a first stab at that, is what you're saying.
To get more specific about which side of the street is preferred and why, and to focus on station locations as well.
How many other alternatives will be studied? For instance, every time you put a station in, are you studying what it would be on one side of the street versus the middle of the street versus the other side of the street?
In most places, we'll be looking at 3 options, the preferred one and 2 others, but that varies a little bit in some places. But typically, there will be 3 alternatives studied. So on 2nd Avenue in downtown, we have the opportunity, really, the options are to go down the middle or the east side of the street or the west side of the street. That would be fairly typical.
The word and the phrase preferred alternatives scares some people who are looking at this monorail, even supporters who still worry that this early in the process to have something called preferred feels like a just juggernaut. Yeah. Feels like that's what you guys want, and there's no room for debate at this point.
CR, I guarantee you that even though this is our preferred alternative at this date, we will not build the monorail exactly as this is drawn up today. We'll learn some things over the next 6 months. There will absolutely be changes. Changes in station locations, stations in whether it's vertical or horizontal, changes in alignment at some points in the route. We're learning every day. We're going to engage in a large number of discussions with the community in the next half a year, and there will be changes.
Seattle Center, which is something we're going to talk about a little bit more in our next segment, but the plan now is to have at least 3 routes studied, maybe 4, but one that goes through the center, one that goes north of the center, and one that goes south of the center in effect. If you have a preferred alternative, you are saying that with respect to that, and this applies to all the different parts of the route that you're doing different alternatives. It's either of those 3 routes could be chosen next December by you. There's nothing in this EIS and calling one preferred that makes one the lead over the others.
2 things. Yes, that's true. We will study each of the alternatives equally, and we will make a decision based on which best serves people in Seattle at the end of this process. So that does not bias in that regard at the end. However, my guess is we'll study 4 routes in and around Seattle Center. So 2 cross the center routes, 1 to the north and 1 to the south.
Why call any one of them preferred?
As long as we stay flexible, as long as we don't tell the public what our best thinking is, the public tends to not really engage. And so we've found that by saying, at this moment, we're focusing on one, gets the public to really jump in and respond to that and give us really high quality feedback. And we want that kind of quality response.
So that's what the preferred does.
That's right. And it's based on community input up to this time, based on work with Metro about bus routes, with the City Department of Transportation. So those groups all worked very closely with us, and we had thousands and thousands of citizen comments over the last few months about preferred alternatives.
You've been out
as
there.
well.
Couple things before we get to Seattle Center. The current monorail, 5th Avenue, what's the status? That becomes a landmark. Do you have to build on top of it, under it, around it?
We don't, just designation of a landmark doesn't decide the issue. Then they have to decide which components of the monorail are a landmark. So they could decide that the stations are a landmark, the columns and beams, the cars, or the route.
Doesn't mean it stays up.
And so it does not mean it stays up. So you'd still negotiate the conditions of that landmark
What is your preferred
status.
route for 5th Avenue?
The preferred route would be right where the current monorail is, right down the center of 5th Avenue connecting. So we have said to the Landmarks Board, we believe that route is historic, and we believe the cars are significant, and we believe the best way to preserve that route is to actually take down the current monorail and put a new monorail in place along that route.
About Seattle Center, it's not the only part of the route, but it's a big part of the route that's generating some controversy. Whether you go through Seattle Center, in effect, or you go around it, either to the north or the south. Why not go around it? The preferred alternative has you going through it, sort of cutting through, if you will, the north part of the International Fountain green space. Why ruin that? It's hard enough to sort of create new parks in this day and age. We've got one there. A whole bunch of people want to keep it that way. Why not just try and go around it?
Well, there are a number of reasons, but let's say again, the preferred alternative is not a decision.
Fair
so
enough.
We've not,
but it's
we've
your
not
best
made a
thinking at
decision.
this point, and you're saying if you did it today, that's what you would do.
Very good.
How'd you get there?
We got there as a result of a 1.5-year community process, talking with residents of the Queen Anne Uptown neighborhood, all of the user groups in Seattle Center, and gradually this consensus emerged that the Northwest route was the best way to meet all of our objectives there. There are problems with all 4 routes. No one of them perfectly addresses all of the concerns. The south route along Denny, we think Denny is a very major car and bus corridor, and building the monorail on Denny would have significant impacts on traffic mobility there. If we went to the north to the Mercer route, that's from our perspective, it's the longest distance, it's the most expensive, there are more 90-degree sharp turns, which monorails don't do particularly well. It's a longer trip time. So there are a number of reasons why the Mercer route is not ideal, but it is possible. It's still one of the alternatives we're considering. And then the 2 routes through the center, let's not misstate here. The road just inside Seattle Center to the south of Intiman Theater and Bagley Wright Theater, there's a road there, and our plan would be to be on that road, not over the grassy area. So let's be clear
Fair enough.
factually.
It's not a road that's being used.
That's right, but there's a difference between some people's vision that this would be out on the lawn or
Fair
over
enough,
the fountain,
fair enough,
and
right.
the idea
You're
is
at the
not
north
to
end
do
of that
It would be
space.
very north end of that, and then we would cut over the trees which are at the west end of Memorial Stadium. So we would be not actually going over the grass, we'd be on that road and then over an area that's behind a fence behind the stadium. So actually relatively minimal impact, and that's why the user groups at Seattle Center were so supportive. But let's be clear, I'm a native Seattleite. When I think about Seattle Center, I think about the Space Needle and I think about the monorail. And there's this connection that I have between the Seattle Center and the monorail, and I think it's an exciting opportunity to celebrate Seattle Center by riders going through there.
Just about a minute left. How important is it that this monorail go through EMP like the current one?
It's one of the things that we would like. The building was built to have a monorail go through it. We think it's an exciting way to celebrate Seattle. It's a visitor destination here, and it would be great if we're able to do that, but it's not a requirement.
The only way to do that, however, is to go through the center.
One
if
of
you
the
go north
two,
or south,
that's
one
right.
of the three
Either
routes.
of the two through the center routes could go through EMP.
Tom Weeks, thanks for being here. We should say you're a volunteer chair of the board and spending almost your full time on this.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Take care. Stay with us. Jane Zaleski is up next. She's the head of the Bumbershoot Festival at Seattle Center when City Inside Out continues in a moment. We now welcome Jane Zaleski. She is the president of One Reel, which organizes the annual Bumbershoot Festival at Seattle Center, among many other community events. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
When did you first realize they were planning to have a preferred alternative that went through Seattle Center?
Well, I actually believe that the first date the preferred alternative came into light was on January 28th, so about 2 months ago, really.
Did it surprise you?
Well, yeah, it surprised me that it got the kind of attention that it got and support that it got, because to me, running any monorail through the Seattle Center is objectionable.
During the vote last fall, most of the route got mandated, but Seattle Center, as we were talking with Tom Weeks, was one that was still left open. I mean, they hadn't decided what the best thing to do, and so that's really what we're in the process of doing, is figuring out how to go through Seattle Center. What's wrong with a route that goes through Seattle Center?
Well, the Seattle Center is so many things to so many different people. I mean, it is a cultural center, it is a sports facility, it is an open space, a 74-acre park. Some people have likened it to, Seattle's Central Park, Seattle's living room. We have spent, I believe, according to Council President Steinbrück, close to $1 billion renovating the Seattle Center, and really done a fabulous job. The center's done a fabulous job of making it this beautiful open space with views and, all connecting back to the heart, which is the fountain area, the International Fountain area. And to run a major transportation system through there just strikes me as wrong.
What would it do? It would. Is it the visual impact that bothers you most? Is it the sound? Is it?
Well, for Bumbershoot, the sound is not an issue, and the
You're loud enough anyway.
Yeah, we're way louder than any monorail would be, but it's the visual impact, both of trains. They say the trains are going to run every 4 to 8 minutes, both directions. I think that's a major distraction, and then there are the poles or the pillars and the guide wire or guide line that runs it between 20 and 60 feet across the center. So it's the visual impact primarily.
As Tom Weeks said, it's not necessarily through the fountain. I mean, it's way on the north end of the fountain, their preferred alternative along what's really sort of a maintenance road in effect.
Well, it's at the north edge of the grass. It may not go actually on the grass, but it's my understanding that a significant number of trees need to be removed, which really sort of form the whole feeling, or take over what that whole feeling is like.
One of I think it was Rich Haig, a big architect in town, designer, said at a council meeting not too long ago this week that they had made a decision back in '62, I guess, to submerge all the utility lines and utility poles. You don't see those at Seattle Center, I guess.
Well, that's been a very conscious choice, for 40 years to really try to open it up. So if 1962 they were thinking about burying utility poles and wires, why on earth now would we run a major transportation system through there?
Your preference is what?
Either of the lines that I believe are being studied that don't go through the Seattle Center. Mercer Street does seem like it would accommodate the Queen Anne community's interests, the business community, by having a station on the north side.
And then along Mercer Street, which we're talking about, literally the north edge of the center, along that sort of theater district.
Correct, on the north edge of the street.
Run it along that arterial.
Exactly.
And then there's a south route.
the Denny Street route, which is new. It's been newly proposed, I think. I think it will be studied at the council's request.
It sounds like you're in the minority here, though. Tom
I don't
Weeks-
think so.
Well, Tom Weeks says that, for over a year, I guess, they've been talking to Seattle Center people, different advisory committees, community groups. The Queen Anne people have come out, the business group, and said they favor this through the center route.
I think the Seattle Center belongs to the public, and this region has shown, not just the citizens of Seattle, but this region has shown a very strong commitment to making Seattle Center what it is today, and I don't believe that the public has been represented in that opinion, and I would beg to differ that the route they chose does not represent the community's opinion, or at least the entire community's opinion.
What, you think more is going to emerge?
Well, yeah, there were a lot of people who have not been in the process. I mean, it was the comment that it's been being discussed for a year and a half. We've been involved only in the process since the beginning of this year.
You meaning Bumbershoot?
Yes, and several people and groups and constituencies were not even included in that process. So to me, to represent this as a community opinion is a little too broad.
Is it moving too fast?
Well, I don't know if it's moving too fast. I mean, I can certainly understand their desire to move quickly, but I think it was in adopting a preferred alternative with the tagline that it's the community's opinion is a little quick.
Because you don't think it, you beg to differ on that.
I do, yes.
What about the Weeks position? And you hear it from many others, and I must say I had a tinge of this myself when I thought Monorail Seattle Center, they kind of fit into the same idea. I mean, what isn't that exactly what, if you're going to put anything through you wouldn't put light rail through the Seattle Center, I don't think. But a monorail, it's been there for 40 years, doesn't it seem like the exact kind of transit proposal you put through there?
And either the South route, the Denny route, or the Mercer Street still accomplishes that. You have a stop over near the Space Needle and EMP, and you have a stop on either side of the Key Arena. So you still have the monorail going through there.
Tom Weeks makes a pretty compelling case that all routes are going to be studied, including these ones you talk
great.
about. Do you worry, however, that calling one a preferred alternative is, in effect, biasing people in that favor?
Sure. I mean, Tom's saying that is what energizes people when they, in fact, put a stake in the ground for the way they think it should go. But if they really do study the alternatives equally and in the end make a public policy decision that's best for the community, then, that's good. But I do believe that calling something preferred does give some kind of bias.
Just a minute here. What's your strategy then? What's Jane Zaletsky going to do in the next 6-8 months to get this decision changed in your favor?
Well, participate in the discussion. I mean, I think it's good we're having this discussion and get people to see, what really to see. And I think we need some visual models of what it's going to look like going through the Seattle Center, and so they can, make a decision that's appropriate for the community. Which is ultimately the City Council's decision. Absolutely. Thanks so much for being here, Jane Zaletsky. You run Bumbershoot, Concerts in the Pier, Teatro Zanzani, and Ivers Family Fourth, or not Ivers, the other Family Fourth. Washington Mutual, yeah. Pardon me. Thanks so much for being here. You're welcome. And we thank you all for watching. Join us next week for another edition of City Inside Out. Until then, on behalf of our talented studio crew here, I'm C.R. Douglas. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Hi, I'm Nick Licata. This stuff's really good. Seattle Channel. Gotta watch it.